created my own scoring system for the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. Now, if you like reality TV analysis, this will be a little bit of a longer video because I'm reading my Substack, so stick around and let me know what you think in the comments at the end. The question I commonly ask is, does relatability make for a better housewife? And while I think we still have at least 6-ish episodes until we get to the reunion to get a definitive answer, I've realized that uncovering what it means for a housewife to be relatable has stirred up something deeper in me. It's a mixture of both introspection and admiration. If I see myself in the housewives, even the ones I'm not really rooting for, what does that say about me? What does it say about everyone else who can't even relate to them at all? Reality TV is one of the few spaces where women's lives are documented in extreme detail and taken extremely unseriously all at the same time. Emotional monologues become TikTok sounds. Dinner fights become reenactments. We watch these shows for entertainment, schadenfreude, and fun. The women on Real Housewives are campy, hilarious, dramatic, and sometimes completely absurd. It can be hard to know when the act stops and reality begins. And sometimes I don't think the audience even wants to know. As social media evolved, the audience's relationship to the shows evolved with it. The budgets grew, the glam and wardrobe became more elaborate, and alongside that, the expectation became something else. The audience expected escalation, bigger fights, deeper revelations, more exposure. And when the women delivered those things, it still isn't considered enough. The women on The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills are constantly watched, endlessly analyzed, and still treated as if nothing they reveal about themselves even counts. They exist in a paradox in which visibility is guaranteed, but legitimacy is not. I realized watching them that there was no system designed to preserve their humanity. No record that distinguished performance from personhood. And then I realized after a few weeks, I had accidentally built one. My Like A Scorecard was an attempt to measure relatability as if that were a legitimate statistic. A record of moments where these women revealed something about themselves. I often joke that it is similar to Whose Line Is It Anyways, where Drew Carey says the points are made up and the score doesn't matter. However, after a handful of weeks, I noticed that the housewives were noticing the scoreboard. They were liking and favoriting and reposting it, which meant being relatable did matter. It mattered to them. Because what is the point of being so visible, so vulnerable, and then still not being seen? In some small way, I was creating a bridge for those moments to exist outside of opinion. Once relatability had a number attached to it, it stopped feeling like a vague impression and became evidence. And evidence, unlike opinion, has weight. Now, I will say what makes someone like us is subjective. A realization that maybe we have more in common with one another than we think we do, and we just have to look for it. I first began to examine how deeply this instinct ran in me after covering Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex's Netflix series With Love Meghan on the podcast I co-host with my sister called Meghan Like Us. Meghan exists in a category that feels structurally familiar, a woman whose visibility precedes her. In a way, her identity has been flattened into a symbol, and her existence is debated as if she were a concept instead of a person. By watching Meghan, I became aware of how easily public women become narratives rather than individuals. Funny enough, I didn't go into this exercise to defend any of the housewives, although now it's clear I am documenting them. The scoreboard, to me, began to showcase a preservation of their personhood rather than their persona. As a former athlete turned film producer, I know a bit about keeping score, character growth, and building an audience that has empathy. It is a blend of my worldview that inspired me to publicly keep score in the first place, and I want to explain. In sports, there is a saying used to end a disagreement. Scoreboard. It is the ultimate equalizer. You may think your team is better, but only one team can win, and the scoreboard proves it. I grew up in a sports family, and I am comfortably competitive. I played fast pitch softball at the Division I and professional levels. I broke some records, got inducted into the Hall of Fame. I also spent years as an ESPN color analyst for fast pitch softball. I love a play-by-play. How game-to-game stats can change. Athletes typically have their own story arcs as they move through a given season. And sometimes how you start is rarely how you finish, unless you're like Tony Gwynn and consistently hitting 300 your whole career. Consistency is usually an anomaly, and through the reality TV lens, it makes the audience a little restless. Even if we look at these very real people as characters we have shaped for them, we have all been primed to understand that surprises can, will, and should happen. That's what makes for a good story, and I know a lot about stories. I can admit, I have been in my film nerd era. I earned an MFA in producing from the American Film Institute Conservatory. And later, I worked as a creative executive in Hollywood where I read literally hundreds of scripts and books a year. During that time, I learned how stories are constructed, how characters are shaped, and how audiences are guided toward conclusions. What makes a character compelling is rarely perfection. It's contradiction. It's conflict. In film and television, this has to be carefully curated and crafted and developed on the page through an unbelievable amount of rewrites and a ridiculous number of notes and writers and different voices, all deciding on what actually lands. Reality television, in contrast, captures those moments in real time and shapes that story without a script. It's based on what actually happened and where the story naturally shifts over time. If the cast doesn't give it, it can't really be edited into existence. Now, while the conversation of naysayers typically turns into how real is reality TV, I'd like to point out that most people, if given the chance, wouldn't exploit their lives to the extent some housewives have if there were an opportunity to script literally anything else for them. If baseball players could script a home run every at-bat, Bo Jackson probably wouldn't have cracked that bat over his head, and every team would win the World Series. Funny enough, reality TV is my sports is a common phrase, not just with me, but within the entire Bravo fandom. As far as I could tell, no one had actually built a point system. I thought keeping score of relatability would be a super fun way to see if the Real Housewives were actually like us. I award 1 point for each relatable moment. However, I quickly realized the housewives typically had 1 or 2 of those moments per episode. There's a reason why they make good TV after all. They're a little unrelatable. So I took a point from football and basketball and decided to make 1 point equal 5, creating a cumulative episode score that looked more interesting and also felt like it raised the stakes. When I first started sharing the scores on social media, there wasn't much of a story to tell. But after 9 weeks, patterns started emerging. Now, admittedly, the point system is both an honest reflection, but also extremely absurd when applied to housewives who are pushing each other's buttons, throwing shade, and attempting to control their own narratives. But I'd argue sports are also a little absurd. Try explaining baseball to someone who didn't grow up with it. Like most things in life, we assign meaning to what we choose to measure. And I started to realize that so much of the content surrounding reality TV and women in pop culture demanded more from them, but it also stripped their humanity. The constant calls for someone to be fired from their job began to leave a really bad taste in my mouth. Yes, their job is to make entertaining reality television, but at what cost? The audience demands vulnerability, but also that vulnerability needs to be entertaining. Social media punishes self-protection, composure, and especially contradiction. And I find this to be ironic because contradiction is one of the clearest indicators that someone is being real. Characters are consistent, people rarely are. To change your mind is one of the most human things you can do. Part of keeping score requires resisting the instinct to confuse relatability with similarity. Some of the moments that earn points are experiences that I have never lived. These are not my stories. But emotional truth does not require personal equivalence. It requires recognition. The scorecard became a way to resist the flattening of these women, not to demand more from them, but to acknowledge what they had already given. It was a way to say, this moment counted. Keeping score became a way of paying attention. It allowed me to honor the moments that did not look impressive, but were. The scorecard proves that they are real, not just housewives, but real women. In tracking their relatability, I have created evidence for something else. Evidence that visibility does not have to be flawless to be meaningful. Evidence that we don't have to agree with someone completely in order to have empathy for them. And maybe that's the point of keeping score. Not to decide who wins, but to remember that the women on the screen who are crying in couture, arguing at dinner, and openly failing and trying again are not just characters. They are people. And the least that we can do is remember that.